Hello, this is Crane, and I want to talk about learning Brood War, and specifically learning Brood War strategy. There's a pretty well known quote from Day 9 where he says, Starcraft is a real time strategy game with a focus on the real time. And what he means by this, and it's a very true statement, is in order to properly execute strategy, you need to have the mechanics to back it up. And that's definitely true, but I think that as a brand new player, you should learn the two simultaneously. You should learn your mechanics at the same time you learn strategy. And actually, strategy is a better way to view your progression through learning Brood War. So that's kind of what I'm going to focus on in this video, is the strategy section. But what is Brood War strategy? The way I view strategy in Brood War is it's an algorithm or a flowchart beginning at the very start of the game with 4 workers on a map in a matchup and ending when a player wins or loses. And it's all of the actions and decisions in between that make this web or flowchart of an algorithm. And obviously there's a ton of different ways that this flow chart could flow, and it's a huge web of different options, and it's super complex. So how do you get from a brand new player with no knowledge to a player who has this algorithm in their head and can react to anything that their opponent can do? That's kind of what I'm trying to lay out in this video, is to go from that brand new player to a player who's comfortable against everything. So the way to do that is to limit your focus. People learn things progressively. When you learned math, you didn't learn how to count, how to do algebra and calculus all at the same time. You learned them in order because you went from something simple to something complex. The same is true for learning Brood War. Don't learn how to micro carriers if you can't execute your build. Don't focus on the late game if you are still struggling to survive the early game. That's kind of the focus of the steps that I'm going to show you. So the first step in learning Brood War is just learn the very basics. Learn what units are in Brood War. Learn kind of what they can do against each other. Dragoons versus Marines, or Zealots versus Zerglings. Just in general. Learn what the words mean. Learn what macro is, what micro is. Learn the very basics of hotkeys. That's it. You don't need to learn anything more than that at this step. And to do that, just play a campaign. Play BGH. Find some free-for-alls to play in. And watch tournaments. Find a streamer you like. Just kind of soak in Brood War and understand it at a very high level. And through this process, you really want to learn 2 things, make 2 decisions. One is you want to decide your race. You can always change later, but at this point you should commit to one race, which obviously will be Protoss. And you also want to decide your style at a very high level. Are you an aggressive player or a defensive player? Do you like long games or short games? Just kind of get a feel for what you want to get out of a Brood War game. And at this point, you should also start making relationships. Brood War is a very old game, and there's a lot of knowledge out there. So don't reinvent the wheel. Find people with knowledge and ask questions. Find practice partners that you can play against. Join Discord so that you can socialize about the game and learn through osmosis. And also, there are several tournaments that exist strictly for brand new players with zero knowledge about the game. So join them, use them, and learn. So at this very first step, you've decided a race and you kind of know your skill level and your style you want to go for. The next step is to learn a build order. When I say build order, I mean it very loosely. What I mean is you should have a frame for what a game should look like at a very high level. The early game should have a very specific build order, but then the rest of the game should be kind of just general plans. So the example I have right here is a forge fast expand, which is about the first 3 minutes of the game in PvZ. And then there's a 730 +1/+1 timing, which is it's a Zealot Corsair timing attack that hits the Zerg at 7 minutes and 30 seconds. And then an 8-gate Goon Templar timing push, which is a mid-game push that intends to kill the Zerg around 12 minutes. And this is a frame. It's not, the end of this is not specific build order numbers. Like, you're not going to do a 130 supply pylon. Don't worry about that. You just need to know the general scheme of what you're going to do. And you should do single player practice to do this. And you only want to get good enough. You don't have to do it perfectly in single player. That's a waste of time. You just need to get it good enough. If your 730 timing hits at 9 minutes, that's fine. If your 8-gate Goon Templar push that should hit at 12 minutes hits at 15, that's fine too. Just get the general scheme of the game down so that you have a high level understanding of, I'm going to go from this type of unit to this type of unit to this type of unit. That's it. So you have to pick a build that matches your skill level at this step. The 3 portions of the build that I'm showing here are difficult. They're complex. A master's level StarCraft 2 player could probably learn these in a single player practice right away. But most players won't, especially if you're brand new to RTS. So you need to be realistic. You need to pick a build that matches your skill level instead of trying to overcome something that's relatively complex. There's no reason to learn the mid game if you're still struggling with the early game. The other thing that I want to say is you should try to pick a build that ends in a timing attack. Any kind of big push that tries to kill your opponent. And the reason for that is, again, you want to limit your focus. You don't need to think about the whole game from the very beginning of the game to mining out the whole map. You just need to focus on the beginning of the game up into that timing push. And I'm not saying that if the timing push fails and doesn't kill your opponent, you should just leave the game, but you shouldn't worry about anything after that timing push. If that push fails, then just go back and think about what you did in the push and what you did before the push and make that better. Don't worry about anything after it, at least not at this point. It gives you a nice clean window of what to focus on if you choose a timing attack. So I've put together this chart of what I would recommend to players at differing skill levels as a first build to learn. If you're brand new to RTS, I think in PvP and PvZ, you should just learn 2-gate Zealot. You're going to learn how to do basic macro and basic micro doing that. In PvT, I recommend doing a 2-gate Robo, which is Dragoons and Observers. Just use that to try to kill your opponent. If you're moderately experienced, I would say in PvP, do a 3-gate Observer build, because you'll be able to do a pretty strong Dragoon timing, but you'll be safe against Dark Templar. In PvT, I would say to do a fast expand build, particularly a 28 Nexus build, and then go into a Bulldog, which is a Dragoon Zealot shuttle push that intends to kill any Terran who fast expanded. And then in PvZ, I think you should do a Forge Fast Expand, which is the standard opening in PvZ, and then go into a 4-gate Speed Lot, which is a 6 minute 30-second timing that intends to just overwhelm the Zerg with Zealots, which works quite well actually. If you have a lot of RTS experience, then in PvP, just go for a 2-gate Reaver, and then do an attack when you have 2 Reavers and a shuttle. That'll teach you a lot of Dragoon control as well as Shuttle Reaver control, which are both super important for PvP. In PvT, if you're very experienced, you should do a 28 Nexus and then get a fast third base, and then just stay on 3 bases. Get 10 to 12 gates and just go all in on 3 bases. And then in PvZ, the build I talked about earlier, FFE into 730 timing into an 8 gate, I think it's a really standard, reliable way to play PvZ. So if you can jump right into that from the beginning, it's really nice. So at this point, you have chosen a build, you've learned it decently well in single player, enough that you're a little bit comfortable with it. The next step is to practice that build against an opponent who's doing one build over and over. So finding a practice partner at this point is very important. It makes a huge difference to be able to fight the same opponent over and over. And your goal with this step, there's 2 things really. One is you're going to refine your play so that 9-minute attack is now on time. It's at 7:30. And you just clean up your play in general and get more efficient at doing it. And the second thing you're doing is you're creating a framework for the matchup. This is the core of your flowchart or of your algorithm, where you're going to compare all of the different builds you see in the future against this one. So you're going to see, okay, the timing between the cannon and the Zerglings is this. When I attack with my Zealots, there's about this many Hydras. Things like that. And I also want to note here that I'm showing 6 boxes here, but in reality, this is a ton of steps. Like, there's a ton of steps in the Forge Fast Expand, and there's a lot of different timings that you can see Zerglings being produced, and when your Corsair first scouts, what does the Zerg look like? There's a ton of steps in between, but I'm just showing these 6 steps as a reference. In reality, it's a huge chain of hundreds of boxes, really. So at this point, again, you're just trying to practice against one build so that you have kind of a base knowledge of what the matchup should look like. When you're comfortable with that, then you can vary your opponent's builds. Don't change your build, just change your reactions, and let your opponents bring new experiences to you. So the way this usually will work is you'll just start laddering. So you're used to overpool and you're join a ladder game, and suddenly you have 6 lings killing your cannon before it finished. What the hell's up with that? Well, you have a reference build versus overpool. So you can look at the replays and compare and say, this opponent got a pool faster than I'm used to. So that's a 9 pool. So I can learn a reaction to that 9 pool and implement it in my algorithm. And you just continue doing that. Just keep finding new ways to lose and ways to react against those strategies. And this process takes months. I mean, this is literally the core of learning Brood War, is to know how to scout and how to react to different builds from your opponent. And this is the fun part. This is fleshing out your knowledge of the game and getting a really good understanding of what Brood War is, what a matchup is. So, one thing I want to note on here is how you learn correct reactions. Meaning, if you see a 9 pool, what is the reaction? Or if you see a 3-hatch Hydra, what are you supposed to do? At this point, just ask somebody. There's no reason for you to try to invent a solution. The answers are very high level at this point, so very broad. So you can just say, hey, what do I do against 3-hatch Hydra? And they'll tell you, and you can implement that into the strategy. as you get better and better, the answers to the questions become more and more specific. But you also get a better frame of reference, so you may be able to answer some of them yourself. So really, what I'm trying to say is, initially, there's nothing wrong with asking questions on broad topics. And as you progress and as you watch more Brood War and play more Brood War and learn more reactions, it becomes easier and easier for you to have the resources and the knowledge to tell yourself why you lost without asking for advice. But there's no shame in asking right at the beginning because you don't know. You don't have references. So from here, we have a build that we're comfortable with and a bunch of reactions. We have a fairly complex flowchart of the game. The next step is to learn new builds. And there's really two reasons to do this. One is, let's say you're one of the brand new players who decided they're going to learn 2-gate in PvZ first. It's hard to transition out of 2-gate. It's not a standard way of playing. It's a little bit atypical. And it's hard to get into a mid-game with it. So you're going to hit a plateau where it becomes harder to progress. When that happens, go to a more standard build that can go into the mid-game better. Or if you have a game, or if you've chosen a build that goes into the mid-game cleanly, and you're finding you're not finishing opponents in the mid-game, start adding on to the end of this algorithm. Start developing your late game. Plateauing often can be solved by changing your build order slightly. But if you've chosen a super standard build and you're doing great and you're really comfortable in most scenarios, then if you get into tournaments, it can be valuable to learn different strategies as well. Or maybe you're just bored and want to learn new strategies. That's fine too. But I want to make it clear that you should only vary your builds when you're ready for it. Don't just ladder and every game do a different build, or every day choose a different build. You should get very comfortable with the build you've chosen first and then decide to change. And the reason for that is skills transfer. If I'm very comfortable with a Forge Fast Expand, then a lot of the scouting knowledge, a lot of the skills that I've learned doing a Forge Fast Expand will translate to Gate Fast Expand. Not 100%, but I have some transfer of knowledge. But if you bounce between the builds all the time, you never get deep enough into one of them to have skill, to have any skill at it, right? The other reason that you should get comfortable is, let's say that I've got really comfortable with Forge Fast Expand into a 730 timing, into an 8-gate timing. I can change out one of those components and rely on the rest of my build to make up for it. What I mean by that is, let's say I decide I'm going to learn to gate expand. Well, Forge Fast Expand into a 730 timing is very similar to gate expand into 730 timing. I'm going into a familiar mid-game. So I don't have to throw out the whole build and relearn it from scratch. I just take out one section of the build and change it out. So again, you're limiting your focus. You're focusing on just that change instead of changing the whole thing and relearning everything. So at this point, you have a huge algorithm, a giant web of decisions, and you're very comfortable in a lot of situations. And at this point, you're probably B or A rank, just from doing this process. And so what I'm trying to say with all of this is not literally make an algorithm. That's not the goal of this discussion. But the algorithm should be in the back of your mind. You should be thinking about games progressing through, and you should be comparing new experiences to a baseline experience. I think that is the most important takeaway of this, is to create your baseline and utilize it. compare against it. And I think also the algorithm is a useful tool to explain why this process I'm showing here is valuable, about learning basics and then a build order and then one build against one build and then one build against many, and then, only then, learning different builds. I think this process is the core of how a brand new player can efficiently go from no knowledge to a relatively good player. So I think that's it. Good luck.